What is up, Notre Dame fans? This is the Irish Huddle live show here at blueandgold.com. I'm Mike Singer. Next to me is Patrick Engel, and we're also joined by senior editor, the great and esteemed Lou Somogyi. Guys, how's it going? First of all, the weather in South Bend. How's everything in in South Bend right now?
It's northern Indiana in December,
Extraordinary.
man. It's cold.
What were the temperatures like on Monday, Lou?
It's supposed to get up to 50 on both Thursday and Friday. We're not supposed to even have to have snow till after the middle of the month, like around the 16th or 17th. So it's been the tropics up here.
Well, right now, you guys know I live in Atlanta. I'm the recruiting guy here at Blue and Gold, so I like to be where all the recruits are, and I also don't mind that it's a little bit warmer. But I went out to grab dinner tonight, and I went out in my pajama pants because I was doing pickup and a t-shirt, and it was 43 degrees, and it was a lot colder than I was expecting. But you guys aren't here to listen to me talk about my day. You want to hear us talk about Notre Dame football. So we are here to do that. Of course, we are live right now on YouTube. So we appreciate everyone who is joining us live. We appreciate everyone watching our show back, the replay. And of course, for our podcast audience, you know we love you too. Thousands of people tune in to our podcast as well. So we really appreciate that. We just want to make sure if you're watching the video live or watching the replay, please hit the like button. Hit that thumbs up. That really helps out our channel. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. I think in the past month we grew like 1,200 subscribers on YouTube, and it's free, of course, and it helps out our channel. So please continue to like our videos, watch our videos, and subscribe to us on YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter at rivals_Mike Singer. Excuse me, just rivals_Singer. First name's on in there. You can follow Patrick on Twitter, Patrick Engel _ and Lou Somogyi is BGI _ Lou Somogyi. All right, let's get into Notre Dame's 45-21 win over Syracuse. Guys, it started off a little shaky. It wasn't the prettiest game in the beginning, and then I remember posting on our message board during the game that I feel like this late hit is going to, like, Notre Dame's got life on a drive, and I feel like they're going to cruise from here on out. I'm usually not correct, but that time I was. The defense settled in as well, other than a couple of long runs. So we have the game comparison pulled up for our YouTube audience. Notre Dame outgained Syracuse 568-414. That rushing yardage, Lou, 229. And I'll also mention the sack-adjusted rush yards because I know Patrick feels strongly about sacks not being counted as rushing yards. And I think that's an NFL thing. They don't count it. College does, we will continue to beat that or pound our fists on the table for NCAA needs to change that. So, Lou, thoughts on Notre Dame's defensive performance against Syracuse?
I think one of the things sometimes you see with championship teams is they know, deep down, they know when they can afford a little bit of a letdown and pick their spots as to when to have them. Look, Syracuse came in there 1-9. Clemson's on the horizon, a rematch there. Playoffs are on the horizon. It's senior day. And I think it was the right time as far as just maybe not being as mentally sharp going into the game defensively. It was a stunning stat because Notre Dame was fourth in the country in run defense at 85 yards a game. And I think Syracuse was fourth at the bottom, averaging 78 yards a game, and they had 3 yards rushing the previous week against North Carolina State. Their star freshman running back, Sean Tucker, had 16 carries for 18 yards. So you're thinking, my gosh, this is a really, really egregious mismatch there. And, well, you can afford to have that against a Syracuse. And I think that's also maybe a benefit going into Clemson because they know they have to be much sharper. And Clemson will be extremely determined to prove that being held to 34 yards rushing against Notre Dame the first time, while Notre Dame ran for 208, and Travis Etienne, the all-time ACC rushing leader, gaining only 28 yards on 18 carries, They want to really prove something, but now I think Notre Dame also wants to prove that, hey, that that game against Syracuse was an anomaly.
Yeah, I look at it a lot of the same way, Lou. And I know I don't like playing this game in most situations, but let's take out the 80-yard touchdown run at the end of the game against Notre Dame's backups and that 229 rushing yardage, or 232, I should say. I can't believe I just fell for sack adjusted yards. And what Syracuse averaged 6.4 yards a play. That goes down a lot. And I don't really know that you panic because the backups gave up an 80-yard run to a second string running back. And that said, yeah, you can go find some plays in the first half. I mean, there were 4 runs of 10 plus yards where it's like, all right, it looks leakier than you're accustomed to seeing. I mean, go back to that touchdown run in the early third quarter, I should say. Sean Tucker's 40-yarder. I mean, you had Kyle Hamilton miss a tackle, take a bad angle. Shane Simon, same thing, and then get blocked out of the play. Sean Crawford miss a tackle. Like, all of that stuff had to go wrong. And I don't know. I just don't really think that that's something that's repeatable. Like, all right, how many times is Kyle Hamilton going to miss tackles or take a bad angle? Like, you don't expect that very often. How many games is he going to have a singular tackle? You just kind of look at that and it's like, yeah, it's your best player. He's going to show up. And all right, it's an off game, Lou. Like you said, and the situation just kind of allowed for it. I agree with a lot of what you said there, just about this being a time for a letdown, even if you're not, thinking like top of mind going into this. Oh yeah, we can just slip up or anything. And yeah, I don't know. I just don't have a lot of long-term concerns or anything. It's like, oh, this is a demise of their run defense or anything. I mean, let's just go back and look over the past 15 games or the past 9 games and look at the rushing offenses and running backs and offensive lines that they've won up front against and held to under 70 yards. I mean, it includes Breece Hall, Travis Etienne, A.J. Dillon, Michael Carter, Javonte Williams. Like, I don't know. That body of work speaks a lot more to me than an anonymous afternoon in December against a Syracuse team that, to their credit, didn't want to fold like a lawn chair in a tornado and actually wanted to end the season as strong as it could have hoped to.
Look, I've been around for 11 years, one of the great motivators in college football history, Lou Holtz. He has said this his first year, I'll never forget it. No matter what, there are going to be 3 games a year where the team is not going to be at its sharpest, whether it's flat or whatever else. And there will be 3 games where there will be at an emotional fervor. The other 5, it's kind of in between. The important thing is those 3 days where you're not as sharp or you're not, in sync as much, they have to come against opponents where you can still beat them with pure talent. That's what I mean by timing, if there's such a thing, timing letdowns at the right time, such as the Syracuse game. Louisville was another one. You can pick them out. Maybe Duke in the opener was one, even though sometimes you wonder how you can be flat for an opener. But you had the COVID thing. You had so many questions about whether there even would be a season this year. So they've timed it correctly. And I don't anticipate that it'll be a problem hereafter.
Yeah, it's kind of like baseball, isn't it? Where if you're a starting pitcher, you make 35 starts a year. You're going to have 5 where you can get anybody out. You're going to have 5 where you get nobody out. And the other 25 or something in between. And it's, if you're any good, you'll win more of those other 25. And the 5 where you are terrible is against a bad team, or you hope to just get lucky and hope they don't punish your mistakes for 400 feet and instead just hit it in the gap and you don't get shelled. It kind of looks like that. And yeah, Notre Dame picked its off days against teams that were not that good.
I also should add, it's maybe Notre Dame got a little lucky that they're playing in a conference because the conference opponents weren't too good for most
Sure,
of the year. I mean,
sure, absolutely.
the one game that you guys didn't mention that Notre Dame struggled in that I can think of in conference play was, even Florida State, 16-point win. The defense, that was funny because the defense struggled in that game, and oh man, what came first, the FSU or Louisville game, Patrick?
Florida State.
FS
Okay, so it was the defense stunk, offense is great, and then the next week it was completely flipped. I'm like, guys, we need to calm down a little bit. The Louisville was the 12-7 one, so yeah, maybe playing in the ACC made the Irish's season a little bit easier. What are the odds of that? Guys, we got to move to talking about offense, because how about the performance of Ian Book and Javon McKinley? It was a great game for Javon McKinley to get his first touchdown, because he had a hat trick, guys. 7 receptions, 111 yards, 3 scores. Ian Book on the day, if you would have told me before the game that he'd have 37 completions, I don't know what I would have really said, but I would have been surprised because you would have thought it would have been like 15-20. I listened to your guys' Irish Huddle from last Thursday, and you guys put like a playing your over under game. How much will we see the backup quarterbacks? Will they see over a quarter of time? And they didn't, because one, Brendan Clark wasn't able to play, but also Book needed to play for Notre Dame to put this game away and get somewhat style points. So Patrick, tell us about Javon McKinley, Ian Book, and Kyron Williams went over 100 yards, as well as Chris Tyree. So just a big offensive output.
So let me ask this question either to both of you and to anyone listening. Let's say I told you in June that Notre Dame's top receiver or go-to boundary receiver, number one receiver, whatever label you want to put on it, would be 10 games in and averaging 17.8 yards per catch. You would have been expecting, or you would have looked at that and said, Kevin Austin's going to have a really good year. That's 17.8 yards a catch. Like, that's really good. More than Chase Claypool. I think more than Will Fuller's best season. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Lou. So now that Javon McKinley's doing that, I mean, like I said, you have to look at it in that kind of light, right? Where he's just been a big play threat. I've counted it now. I believe he's up to 12 catches of at least 20 yards. I think that's as of Saturday. Yeah, it is, including the 320 plus yard touchdowns he scored on Saturday. So yeah, I mean, I just think he's been every bit the big play go-to guy that you would have expected Kevin Austin to do. And maybe until, I guess I'll say this, we didn't see the contested catch, end zone, whatever have you, 50-50 until today, maybe with one exception. I can't remember which game it was. He'd only had 2 red zone catches all year. And I guess technically that didn't change because all 3 of the throws were from outside the 20. But for all intents and purposes, 3 touchdowns are exactly that. He hadn't scored a touchdown. So maybe there was still one little thing you wanted to see from him as far as push a guy around, score a touchdown, use that big frame. So, and I think that was, like one kind of fair thing of like, can he do this, or what will happen, or can he do that against the ACC Championship or against Clemson or whoever they see in the playoff if they get there. I think you feel good about that now. I mean, I know you can say, oh, Syracuse. I mean, one of the guys he beat. They actually have some pretty talented corners, or at least a couple of them back there, where on one he just kind of shoved the guy aside and it was their best defender, Melon Fonwu. So I don't know. I think you can look at this and say, oh, Syracuse, blah, throw it away, and that'd be completely missing the point of just how much of a steady big play threat Javon McKinley's been for them.
You look at somebody like Javon McKinley, and that's just another example of player development over 3, 4, 5 years, and how instant gratification doesn't always come overnight. 5 years ago, Javon McKinley was a top 60 recruit. He and Tommy Kramer were the top rated recruits in that Notre Dame class. He put up some ungodly video game type numbers in an outstanding league in California. And then suffers a broken leg, has other setbacks on and off the field. And all of a sudden, here he is, emerging, just like Miles Boykin did as a senior. The way Chase Claypool went from a good college receiver to a great force as a senior as well. And you know, here I'll make a prediction right here, guys. 2 or 3 years from now, Notre Dame is going to recruit a 5-star receiver, and people are going to be wondering, why isn't he playing? Why are they playing Jordan Johnson there when they need to get the young talent in? And sometimes we tend to forget because there's always new talent coming in, and it's human nature to want to see the new toys in the lineup. And we forget about the old toys that have been in a college program for 3-4 years, have been getting the coaching, developing, have the right mental attitude, and continue to just prosper. And one day their time arrives, they seize that opportunity, and you see somebody like a Javon McKinley, who was a top 60 recruit, now actualize that potential. Maybe it'll take a year for Jordan Johnson, maybe 2, maybe 3. You don't know. And some other guys like a Michael Mayer or a Chris Tyree or Clarence Lewis, it clicks for them right away. But it's not one size fits all. People just develop at their own pace. There's, a number of things that are, there's some adjustments to be made in college life as well. So now we're seeing it all come together for Javon McKinley, and it's been wonderful to see.
All right, Lou, I got a follow-up question. This is a little off script for you. So you had Chase Claypool was that big target last year, and Javon McKinley this year. Well, let's assume that Javon McKinley and Ben Skoranek do not return, with the extra year of COVID eligibility, let's call it. I'm not 100% sure, but let's just, for the sake of this, say that they're not back. Who is that guy next year? Is it Kevin Austin? That's the guy everyone would think first, but who knows? Would you have any other candidates, or is that definitely Kevin Austin as that big threat who emerges in the passing game next year?
Well, it can be, because he's suddenly that forgotten guy again. And now, you have the new toys coming in with Lorenzo Styles and others. It's
Ian
like
Colsey,
there's
yeah.
an eagerness to see that. Maybe Avery Davis. First of all, I would be really, really stunned if either Skoranek or McKinley come back next season. They came back this year to get that resume for a pro contract or that opportunity. So I'd be very surprised. But maybe next year it's for Kevin Austin. Look, he's gone, just like Javon McKinley, he's gone through his fair share of trials on and off the field. Javon McKinley entered his senior year with 1 career catch, and I think last year he had 10 or 11, so he had 12 career catches. Kevin Austin will be entering his senior year with about 6 career catches, and all of a sudden the nation might say, whoa, where did that guy come from? Maybe it could be Braden Lindsey. I mean, people have been expecting huge, huge things from him. Everyone's intrigued by his speed, but he was nowhere near physically ready as a freshman. He showed flashes last year as a sophomore in spot situations where he could succeed. And this year he's been hindered constantly with one injury after another. Who knows? Maybe it might be his time, or Lawrence Keys, or Avery Davis, who kind of took that next step this year. He comes back for a 5th year next season, like Javon McKinley did. And all of a sudden you're saying, wow, where did he come from?
I'll say this on McKinley, and I know you kind of touched on him, Lou, as being the next in line of those guys who just kind of emerge later on. And he absolutely is. I would say he's almost in somewhat of a different level of Will Fuller caught 6 passes before his big 2 seasons, but he was a freshman. It's all right. You kind of think, all right, guys got to leave the depth chart and everything. And yeah, he's a freshman. You're still thinking about what he can do. Claypool, I mean, he had 700 yards the year before. He was at least a known commodity. With McKinley, it's almost all right, at least for me, it's you look at that top 60 ranking and it's all right, at what point are you just clinging on to something after 4 years you haven't seen any evidence of. I thought that was going to be the case with him. And maybe on paper, Kevin Austin would look like that if he has some type of year like this next year. But at least we'll have those, 5 catches in 2018 in that one game against Louisville. The pass he didn't catch in the end zone where it's like, yeah, that guy can play. But yeah, it's almost like one of those things where like, yeah, you kind of thought he's not really going to help him that much. And again, who knows what happens if Kevin Austin was healthy, but even more credit to McKinley in that sense. And I'll just continue to self-own myself here after 2 games, writing that, yeah, his role is going to be as a really, really good run blocker. And ever since then, he's done so much more than that.
I don't
you guys are extremely young, so you might not remember the name Arnaz Battle. He was
Yeah.
a quarterback recruit back in 1998 for Notre Dame, parade All-America as a quarterback, and even started 2000 as the season his junior year, but he suffered a season-ending injury in the second game against number 1 Nebraska and was moved to wide receiver thereafter because you had Matt LaVecchio and Carlisle Holiday, and it's like, we got to find a spot for him. And there he is entering his 5th season in 2002 with 5 career catches. And all of a sudden he breaks through with 58 catches. He's a 6th-round draft pick, and maybe Javon, depending on how he tests out at the combine, could, get into that type of category. But Arnaz went on to play 9 years in the NFL.
I don't like to toot my own horn, guys, but before the season, I was on the Javon McKinley bandwagon. I can't say I was on the Avery Davis one at that point, but ever since Avery Davis has made a couple catches, I've loved Avery Davis. I call him a pro guy. I don't know if I'll be right, but I think he's got that skill. Comment from Tommy Rock. He says Micah Jones. I think it was a tweet from one of his family members that was put out over the weekend. And when you kind of read it, you're like, oh, maybe Micah's not coming back. Do you guys have any thoughts on Micah Jones since Tommy Rock asked the question?
Yeah, I one about the same tweet and thinking he's not gonna be back, and 2, let's just assume for a minute that he is, just for the sake of the question. That would be like, if he did anything close to McKinley, would be out McKinleying McKinley. Like he has no career catches, right? Like, am I not mistaken?
That's correct.
No, yeah, I mean, that would be like completely out of nowhere. And like I had mentioned, yeah, with McKinley, when you kind of start to get to a point and think like, yeah, the high school ranking, you're just basing it on something that hasn't existed. I would imagine you're at that place with him if you were, say, counting on him to give you anything, or just considering, all right, what might he be in the rotation? Yeah, that would be like an all-timer type of thing. But yeah, it doesn't sound like, and I don't expect that he will be back.
Well, he's going to be getting his Notre Dame degree in 3 years, which is
that's
a
good.
remarkable accomplishment in itself. And you talk about best of both worlds. He has 2 years of eligibility if he wants to take it, maybe even 3, someplace else. So he can maybe still fulfill his football aspirations, or a desire to showcase what he can do someplace else. But my gosh, if you can graduate from Notre Dame in 3 years, that's an extraordinary accomplishment in itself. And look, maybe part of it is that because you immersed yourself so much in academics, it's going to be more difficult to excel on the football field. Maybe that's where he felt that's where his niche is going to be, is that, hey, let me get my degree first, and then after that, if football is still in the cards, it still can be. But not a lot of people, especially student athletes, can say they graduated from Notre Dame in that short of time.
For our YouTube live audience, for those who enjoy what we're doing here on our blueandgold.com YouTube page, you see the $sign little logo there. You click that. That is basically your way of giving us a tip. Again, if you are so inclined, if you enjoy what we're doing here at Blue and Gold, that really goes a long way in helping Let's keep the lights on here at Blue and Gold. All right, let's move in. Syracuse game in the rearview mirror. Let's talk about what's next. Obviously, the Clemson game looms large, but in looking at the college football playoff selection committee rankings from December 1st, this is last week's, Alabama crushed LSU. That game was never close. Of course, Notre Dame got the win over Syracuse. Clemson struggled a little bit at times against Virginia Tech, but really pulled away in the second half. Ohio State demolished Michigan State. Texas A&M 11-point win over Auburn. Florida rolled Tennessee, and I believe it was Cincinnati had a bye week. So there's your top 7. So everyone's holding serve, but man, ever since Notre Dame beat Clemson on November 7th, guys, we basically have been saying, well, if Notre Dame takes care of Syracuse and Wake and BC and North Carolina, of course the Wake game's canceled, but if Notre Dame wins out from here, they might not even need to beat Clemson. So I'll ask Patrick this first. What is your take on, has Notre Dame unofficially already cemented its spot in the playoff?
Well, I'll say this and to start in that I don't really see a lot of upside in the result of the ACC Championship game. Because, I mean, if you look at where they're at now, let's just say all of a sudden, I don't know, Notre Dame couldn't play the game for obvious reasons or whatever reason, just for a minute. You'd think, all right, how are they going to drop them 3 spots out of the playoff with the resume they have now, right? So either you win and you go from already in to already in, or you lose and it's at least a little more dubious. So the question comes into your mind, what happens? Now, I'm not saying pull out of the game or any stupid suggestions like that, but even with a loss, yes, I think they've done enough. I think we'll see that reflected. The only thing is just don't get completely run off the field, steamrolled like what Alabama did to LSU or something. Or, yeah, I know, Mike, like you mentioned, the Clemson-Virginia Tech game was close for a minute in the first half there, but it was 45-10. That's not going to look good either. Just don't have that happen, and they'll be, I think, safely. And it's just hard to see that even with that loss, which would be to another playoff team, and let's say, again, Clemson beats Notre Dame, just, again, for the sake of the question, Clemson and Notre Dame would be the only teams in the top 4 with a win over another top 4 team. And I know it's kind of hard to do because, well, if you lose, it's pretty hard to be in the top 4. But nonetheless, those losses are rare, and for you to be able to claim one says a lot about your resume as a fellow top 4 team. So it's, I don't know, it's not anything that would be a black mark if they were to lose in the ACC Championship game. I just find it hard to see that even with that there's going to be 4 better bodies of work, 4 teams that I know we hear about it to ad nauseum this year have a eye tested better. I don't know. I think they all but locked it up with Saturday's win, and mainly because I don't see a situation where they get run off the field by Clemson.
Yeah, I would agree with that overall. I think the only other fly in the ointment, perhaps, that could occur is if Florida defeats Alabama in the SEC championship game. Then Alabama's still getting in no matter what. Florida has to get in because it's the SEC champion that just beat number 1. And then if Clemson does beat Notre Dame, they're in. So then it becomes a choice between a 10-1 Notre Dame team or an Ohio State team that played maybe just 6 games or so. And I would like to think in that situation, the committee would still recognize that, hey, Notre Dame played almost double the amount of games, number 1. And number 2, they have maybe, along with Clemson possibly beating Notre Dame, one of the 2 best wins in the country this season. So I think, yes, it's pretty much all but cemented. Again, unless you have that type of performance in the ACC championship game where you're just the doors are blown off you. And I just don't see that happening with this Notre Dame team, as mentally and physically tough as they are. Texas A&M, you know who they remind me of? They remind me of the Notre Dame team from 2018 that made the playoff. It's a good, solid team, but there isn't a wow factor. It's sound fundamentally. It's got, well-known defensive coordinator Mike Elko, who was at Notre Dame. It doesn't have that, as I mentioned, that wow factor or recognition. It's just a good, solid program. And just like Notre Dame in 2018, they got that good quality win at home against Michigan. So did Texas A&M against Florida. But I just don't think it's enough to get them into that first four tier.
So, Lou, you mentioned the Florida win ACC or SEC championship scenario. When I initially answered Mike's question, I'm just kind of, for the sake of the question, just assuming Alabama wins for a minute. Of course, Florida winning would give them a win over a top 4 team. But I don't really even look at that as this thing that could really spoil it, just because, I don't know, I don't think it's much of a decision between what would be a 10-1 Notre Dame and what would be a 6 or 7. I've lost track of how many games each of these teams has gotten postponed by now. 7-0 or 6-0 Ohio State. Like, I just don't. I mean, look, I know you have lack of conference or non-conference games and methods of comparing conferences and whatnot, and this is a tricky thing. But the games have to matter, and it just seems not at all ignoring that, and not at all within what we're trying to do here to put in a Ohio State team based on eye test. And look, as a Northwestern graduate, I will even say this: I don't think like the Northwestern win in the Big Ten title game Ohio State could get, if it gets there, would be anything near this. Like, oh, this thing is a bold-faced 45-point font on a resume that just catapults you in. I don't know. I don't see this. And again, I say this as someone with a ton of respect and admiration for everything that Pat Fitzgerald does and what Northwestern and et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know. Like, the games have to matter. And I just don't see how, when considering that as you should, that's going to be that much of a decision, should it even come down to that, for the playoff committee if Alabama loses.
I guess my question is, all right, if Notre Dame loses, they still should be in. Yes, I think we all 3 agree on that. Also with the point of, but they can't get their doors blown off. What is the number on that? Is it 3 touchdowns? Is it 4 touchdowns? If as long as they lose by 30 or less, we think they're good. Like, Patrick, what do you think that number is?
I don't want to put a hard number on it because score margins can lie. I mean, was the Cotton Bowl really a 27-point game? Probably not, right? I don't know. I guess the Clemson win over Virginia Tech was a 5-touchdown game, but by the end, it didn't really feel like it. I don't know. I just ranted against the eye test, but just, you have to watch the game a little bit to see what really unfolds. And if, all right, Notre Dame puts a bunch of garbage time points and only loses by 17, like, they'll see through that. Just as on the other side of the coin, I think, all right, let's say they lose by 24, but the whole thing was, or maybe, I don't know, 21, but it was a 7-point game until there was 5 minutes left or something, and someone backdoor covers and backdoors their way into a 3-score game. They'll see that too. So I don't know. I guess when you get up into the 30s and it's like, yeah, no matter what, that's not going to lie. But I don't know. I think there's some wiggle room in there as far as, the scoring margin can lie, where, all right, a 3-score loss doesn't look quite as bad, or a slightly bigger margin doesn't look as worse. Or you know what I mean here. I don't know. There's some, I don't think you can just put a number on it and say, all right, they're over. See you later.
I just want to say one thing here. The main talking point or theme or storyline, however you want to talk about it, seems to be for this game is Clemson and how, they're getting revenge and how the, now they have all their players back. Trevor Lawrence is playing and Skalski will probably play and, their defensive linemen and others are finally playing and everything. And it's everything Clemson, Clemson. I remember back to that 2012 championship game between Notre Dame and Alabama. That entire month of December was dedicated to Notre Dame, the comeback of Notre Dame. What an incredible story. Sports Illustrated cover, that the miracle at Notre Dame, Manti Te'o, all these awards. And that Home Depot show was a Notre Dame love fest. Ara Parseghian gets the lifetime achievement. Brian Kelly, the coach of the year. It's Notre Dame, Notre Dame. Alabama was just sitting there quietly in the background saying, okay, okay, okay. Notre Dame right now is the one sitting in the background, hearing all this talk about, well, if Clemson wins by 24 or whatever else, or, they're going to be favored maybe even by double digits. They're the favorite. They got everybody back. And Notre Dame, they're not at home this time, etc. I'm not sure Clemson's going to be the hungrier team in this game.
Hmm.
And I'll just leave it at that.
I like it, Lou. I like it. Well, let's talk about Clemson. Huge game, obviously in the ACC Championship game. Look, we don't need to worry about Clemson margin of victory if Notre Dame just wins the game, and then they're could potentially even be a 1 seed. If Alabama beats Florida, you got to think that Alabama will be the one. With their wins over their top wins will be Florida and Texas A&M, whereas Notre Dame's will be a couple against Clemson. Pretty comparable resumes in my opinion, but you got to think that Alabama will be one. But if they fall to Florida, Notre Dame and Notre Dame beats Clemson, Notre Dame will be the number 1. So guys, the rematch of the century here. We'll go to Patrick first, just kind of looking ahead to next Saturday. We're not gonna do score predictions yet. We'll save that for next week. But just what are your early thoughts about this rematch?
I don't expect Notre Dame to reinvent the wheel or do anything weird here. Go with what got them there. Go with what's worked against pretty much every team on the schedule. And again, that's been what? Winning both lines, physicality, running the ball. You come off of that game against Clemson thinking they won both line of scrimmages and kind of wore them out just with how many of those guys were starting to pick themselves up off the turf as that game went on, or hands on their hips from just being kind of tired from going up against those guys. So I can't see anything that doesn't involve, again, same type of thing where not abandoning running the ball, or that their defensive line has an out of character thing where they're just blown off the ball for 4 quarters. And part of the first game was, all right, like breaking tendencies where you threw the ball out of 12 and 13 personnel and took shots out of that, where maybe that wasn't the case in some of the games before that. Maybe you have, just with there being more film out there, that's less of a thing you can rely on, but that's all right. I mean, you just go with what got you here and put the ball in your best player's hands. And I think Andy Book has given you plenty of reason just to trust him and to do that.
Yeah, I think what I liked the most in that first matchup, which really gave me a lot of hope that Notre Dame could win, is the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. This was in 2018. That 2018 Clemson defensive line was an NFL franchise. And this year, Clemson had 4 new starters along the offensive line. They were in a flux there, going against an all-senior defensive line with Notre Dame that also substitutes liberally and confidently because of the depth that they have, which keeps fresh legs as well. And then on the other side, this is the most experienced line in Notre Dame history, going against a pretty young Clemson defensive line. Look, Mike, you cover the recruiting. Brian Bresee and Miles Murphy, they were 5-star, top 5 recruits. They are still freshmen who have not been in a 4-year college strength and conditioning program, or 5 years like with Liam Eichenberg or Tommy Kramer, and you go with Robert Hainsey, a 4-year starter, Aaron Banks, who's about 330, a very good NFL prospect on the interior. You're still going against guys who they're men. And, you hear Mike Bray say it all the time, men against boys and staying old. I thought Notre Dame had the advantage in both areas. And I still do, although maybe Clemson closed the gap a little because there's not going to be Jared Patterson at center, and Clemson gets a few guys back on their front seven. But watching that Virginia Tech game on Saturday night, or the parts I did, the one thing that really struck me was, you know what? That had to hurt Clemson's pride immensely to see the way they were dominated on the ground at Notre Dame. Notre Dame rushed for 208 yards. Clemson totaled 34. That's an embarrassing stat for a program as prideful as Clemson is and as tremendous as they've been. One of the top two national titles in the last 4 years or so, to have that kind of number glaring at them. And what struck me watching that Virginia Tech game, they weren't whipping the ball all over the field. Hey, Trevor Lawrence is back. Now we can just sling it all over the air. They seemed really, really committed to establishing some type. They almost used that, it seemed to me, like a practice game to practice that inside zone, the outside zone, getting Trevor involved. He had 7 carries, 41 yards, a couple touchdowns. Trevor's last year, he ran for over 500 yards and 5 yards a carry, 9 touchdowns. People forget just what a mobile and effective runner he can be, just like an Ian Book many times. And they weren't going to do that with DJ in that first game. So that's a new wrinkle to deal with there.
Yeah, I definitely don't expect there to be the ground yardage discrepancy of, I think I have it in front of me now. Notre Dame had 217 rushing yards when you get rid of the sacks. I think Clemson was get rid of the sacks and still just under 50. Yeah, I mean, that I can't see that happening again. But yeah, Lou, to your point, like Notre Dame's seniors and well-developed guys on both lines of scrimmages are still exactly that. So that's going to be an advantage for them. And I don't think that Clemson has, in these games since that loss to Notre Dame, has figured something out where it's like, yeah, we can run block better. It's kind of been a bit of a up and down rushing or run blocking operation for them for a lot of the year. And Trevor Lawrence will certainly help with that, with just the quarterback run, but they're not the same run blocking front that they were in the last couple of years. And again, that's not going to go away. That's still something that Notre Dame has to exploit and be able to win. So, and I think they'll still be able to do that. And again,
and that's why I
don't know if
mentioned
it's 200 yards or 150-yard difference or whatever it might be. But yeah, you still circle that as something that Notre Dame can do something here.
And that's why I mentioned earlier, Patrick, why it seemed to me that that Virginia Tech game was almost like a scrimmage or practice for Clemson to try to better establish that run. Trevor threw only 22 times in that game. That's usually a 1/2 for him. Now, Virginia Tech did control the ball and play keep away very well in the first half. That was part of it. But, it seemed Trevor threw 22 times, and then they ended up with 228 yards rushing, I believe, against Virginia Tech. And a lot of it was just that same basic inside zone, pounding the ball, trying to establish something there as almost like a prelude or a practice scrimmage for the Notre Dame game.
All right, we'll go to questions from our YouTube comments here. First, for our live audience, if you like what you hear on our show and you want to basically give us a tip, like you would a restaurant server, we would really appreciate that. Helps us keep the lights on here at blueandgold.com. Question here from Brian. He says, what concerns you more, an improved Clemson defense or offense? Well, you guys think about your answer to this one. I'll go ahead and give mine. I think it's, and when he says improved, I'm going to assume he's kind of talking about guys coming back from the absences that the guys who didn't play against Notre Dame. I'm going to say defense. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is obviously fantastic quarterback, but what DJ Uiagalelei was able to do against Notre Dame, that's not your normal backup quarterback. That kid is a freshman, Lou, but he looked like a man. Like he played like one too,
Yeah.
and was breaking records in that game. So that's my thoughts. We'll go to you first, Lou, and quickly, and so we can get some other questions. What concerns you guys more?
Uh, it's what I mentioned with the defense, the fact that that line is kind of reshuffling a little bit without Jared Patterson in the interior, and then Clemson gets Davis back in the interior on that line there, and we'll see how healthy Skalski and their other linebackers are, but I think there can be a bit of a vulnerability there. Although, Josh Lugg at 310 pounds, he's going to take up an awful lot of mass up front there too. So he can do his share of work. And, offensively, just kind of what I talked about is, Clemson's going to be saying, no way we're going to be held to 34 yards rushing again. And somebody like a Travis Etienne who gets 28 yards on 18 carries, I have a hard time thinking of him being shut down that way. Now, it wasn't like he had a great performance against Virginia Tech either. I think he had 66 yards on 16 carries or something like that. So as Patrick mentioned, it's just not been a typically great Clemson running offense. You've seen with their previous years, they've been in the 240, 250 yard range in rushing. This year, it's been, well under 200 or so, and you saw how they struggled against Notre Dame. So I think this time they look at it as, okay, we might not need to get 200, but with Trevor back, let's at least make Notre Dame have to honor the run a little bit more.
Yeah, I think my answer, I think it's defense, absolutely. And just looking at the upside of, okay, what can each of them reasonably improve or do from that first meeting? It's the same guys up front on the offensive line that have struggled most of the year. I mean, what are you going to have some like 12th game or 11th game breakthrough? Probably not. And yeah, Trevor Lawrence he's Trevor Lawrence. He's the number one pick in the draft. DJU was awesome. If you gave Lawrence the numbers that DJ threw for, that's really good. But I don't know how much better can you do than that? And even then, so Lou, I don't expect Travis Etienne to run for 28 yards again. But I guess at some point, when does that start eating into the passing total numbers? Where, all right, if he runs for, say, 70 yards, you assume that the quarterback doesn't throw for 400. And again, I'm also assuming that Notre Dame's defense doesn't just completely fold and give up 50-something points. I definitely don't see that happening. But anyway, to Clemson's defense, yeah, that would concern me more just because it's more of a challenge for the guys up front, especially one now that they're down one of the starters in Jared Patterson that they had before, and just who's coming back for Clemson back there. James Skalski makes a big difference. Tyler Davis, defensive tackle, makes a big difference for them with his disruption, especially as an interior guy. We'll probably see plenty of Zeke Corral or Josh Lugg or whoever's up there. So, yeah, the improved defense would concern me a little bit more, even if, yes, it's against Notre Dame's biggest strength still in the offensive line, just because of, all right, what's reasonable improvement to expect from what Clemson did a month ago. And I think definitely the upside there of a dominant defensive performance is more realistic than on offense, just because of what they already did on offense with DJ.
Super chat from Jim McCarthy, $25. We really appreciate that, Jim, supporter of our channel. Crip Dog says, does anyone else love Kyren Williams as much as I do? No, Mike Goolsby loves him more. Question here from Rick. He says, who would you give the nod to? Josh Adams in 2015 or Kyren Williams here in 2020, Lou?
I don't want to be accused of recency bias, but as far as what Kyren has been also able to do with blitz pickup and as a pass receiver as well, it's hard not to do it because I think also if Josh would have been taken away, you still had Dexter Williams, and now you still have Chris Tyree and Sebo Flemister, but I'm not sure they were be able to do all the things that they've been required to do. He's been carrying 15, 20 times a game, but man, some of those blocks that he's picked up that has enabled that passing game also to open up. Josh had the more flashy uh, stats and the runs too. I mean, there's never been a player in Notre Dame history who had as many long runs, and that's going to stand out a little bit more, I think, to the average fan. But by the end of that season, he was running on empty. Um, Pretty much starting in November with that Wake Forest game where they were 8-1, and in those final four games, he he was running out of gas there. It was a long season. Kyron is just kind of almost like he said, I don't feel even hurt at all now. Right now, I'm in getting treatment every day, and when you look at what he's been able to do week after week consistently in pass blocking as well, he's the third leading receiver, and then get 1,000 yards as a sophomore after barely playing as a freshman. I think it's been just an even more valuable year.
We appreciate the question, Rick Mahalik. All right, question from T-Rex here. What will the spread for the ACC Championship game? He also says, hey, is that 7 points, Patrick? If you are Vegas, what are you putting the spread at?
Ooh, I don't think it's come out yet.
No, it has not. I checked today.
Yeah.
So
Good question.
If you're an odds maker,
It ended. So
I think it was
the
5.
final spread for November 7 was what? 5.5?
Yeah.
Clemson 5.5?
Right around there, yeah.
I can't imagine a go field goal either way. More than a field goal either way.
Really?
I don't know. I mean, if something tells me Vegas would say, like, it would put Clemson as the favorite.
Yes, I think so.
Like, in terms of, like, I don't know, like, if you made it seems harder to pick against Notre Dame than it does Clemson, based on what we've seen out of them this year. But I don't know. I feel like Vegas will at least buy into the different Clemson team and put it at -3. But yeah, I mean, I know Lawrence is back, and that's not worth nothing, but neither is the result from what we just saw for 60 minutes plus 2 overtimes. I don't know. Maybe it opens at 5 or 6 or something, but it gets down to 3. Like, if you gave me Clemson -5, I'm taking Notre Dame to cover that. No questions asked.
I think it's going to be more like Clemson -9 and come down to maybe 6 or 7. I really think that people have the opinion that, like, okay, the three of us, we live Notre Dame football. Me on the recruiting side, your guys' jobs to cover Notre Dame football. So we know more of the context of how good this Notre Dame football team is. But I feel like the general public just kind of thinks they didn't have Trevor. They were out defensive starters. We don't know who the heck they were, but we just know that they were out defensive starters. So I think that Vegas might play into that when they pick the line. So I think it will be higher. Lou, do you have any quick thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, I agree with you, Mike. I think that to just start it off with, they want to go more than a touchdown with 7 points. I think it would be something like 7.5, 8, just to get a feel for where the money is going. And then, we'll see what happens after that as far as seeing which side the betting is going on, because the whole objective is to make money on both sides. But I think I'd be surprised if Clemson is not favored by more than a touchdown. I don't think it'll be double digits.
Yeah.
Like the playoff game. I think in the playoff it was 15.5.
Right.
And I thought to myself, holy smokes, that's ridiculous. And oh well, they usually know what they're doing. But yeah, I'd be probably looking somewhere between 7.5 to maybe as much as 9.
Sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know. It just feels like free money to me.
A question from Edward here says, Notre Dame beats Clemson again. How could we not be the #1 seed? Does the media all of a sudden say Clemson is not as good as their ranking? We touched on this earlier, guys. I think if Notre Dame beats Clemson, their best shot at the one is if Alabama loses. All right, if Alabama and Notre Dame win, I have a hard time seeing Notre Dame jumping them because now that Clemson win's not as good because Clemson's got 2 losses and then like I said earlier, Alabama also has that Texas A&M win, which they're probably going to finish the season as a 1-loss team and probably at number 5 because you have Florida falling out. Clemson will fall out, so Texas A&M will naturally move up. So maybe if Notre Dame just blows the doors off Clemson, maybe that's their best shot. I don't see them the committee having Notre Dame jump Alabama unless the Crimson Tide lose. Patrick, what do you think?
To answer the question of how could Notre Dame not be the number 1 seed, I don't know. I'd just be preferring Alabama's resume and body of work more. I would understand that, even though I think it'd be a little disingenuous to say, oh, well, now Clemson has 2 losses. They're bad. Like, no, they had 2 losses to a team that would be at worst top 2. And, I mean, I think is good enough to hang with Alabama at the very least. So I don't think it would be a situation where it's all of a sudden, let's start discrediting that win where you can look at, oh yeah, Clemson against everybody else is hammering everybody. Well, except Boston College. But Lou, going back to your point about those 3 games where not everything is at their sharpest. Yeah, I don't know. I just think it would be like they like Alabama's resume better. There's no reason to drop them. And they've looked better. I mean, have they really had that? Okay, Ole Miss maybe was the one game where it wasn't quite as sharp. I don't know. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with every single part of that. I'm just trying to think through the logic here of how Notre Dame wouldn't be number 1 if they do beat Clemson.
Alabama's not going to fall from number 1 if they win the SEC championship against Florida, period. I mean, I think, and part of it, I think there's just subconsciously, hey, these guys have won 5 national championships since 2009. They're competing for the national championship every year. You've got to prove you're better than Alabama on the field. And it really doesn't matter if Alabama's the 1 seed and Notre Dame is 2, because 2 plays 3 and 1 plays 4. So it's not like it really matters. If you're better than them, prove it, hopefully in the playoff. Whether it's in the championship game or in the semifinal. But it's so when I was growing up, the theme always was that a small football player has to prove he can play football, and a big football player has to prove, a big guy has to prove he can't. And that's the same principle with Alabama. It's like they're the big guy on the block, and until somebody else does it, that they're going to be always at that number 1 unless proven otherwise.
Yeah, I just have a hard time seeing how they'd be moved down from that. Like, I don't know. Just for exactly what you said, Lou, it just seems hard to think that they'd actually do that.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter. Well, what does it matter? If
it's not like the 4 is that much worse than the 3 seed. It's what Ohio State or yeah, they're both gonna be really good teams. So, all right, that will do it.
You wanna not have to play Alabama.
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah, but if you're the 2,
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
So if Alabama is 1 and Notre Dame is 2, you're not playing in the first round. If you're better, you'll prove it in the semifinal, and then you'll prove it in the final, hopefully against Alabama.
All right, that will do it for the Irish Huddle Live. We appreciate everyone watching live with us and watching the replay on YouTube. And for our podcast audience, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or wherever you find our show. Appreciate you guys hanging with us. Make sure to go to blueandgold.com for all of your football coverage. On Tuesday, Patrick and I will have a new episode of Pod Like a Champion, our recruiting show with National Signing Day just about a week away. So make sure to lock in to our Blue and Gold YouTube page as well as blueandgold.com. Appreciate it, everybody. Stay safe.